Hey, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started here. Good afternoon. My name is Ian Campbell. I'm Vice President of Operations at PACICC. I am the Administrator for the Risk Officers Forum, and I'm your moderator for this afternoon's broadcast. This is our first Emerging Risks webinar of 2026. We have more than 70 companies represented on the line, so welcome everyone, and special welcome to our first-timers. Our emerging risk webinars are basically 90-minute focused discussions on a single risk issue. Today, we're looking at identifying and assessing risks. We've been doing this now for the past 8 years, kind of a level set to begin the year, looking at emerging risk issues and black swan issues, things that maybe you weren't considering. You want to know what other companies are doing and how they're dealing with things. So I'm just going to begin with some housekeeping items and thank my colleague Danica Hall, who's working behind the scenes. So thanks, Danica, for ensuring a smooth broadcast today. We're going to look at housekeeping items. I will introduce our industry panel. We'll then look at the next event is going to be a Risk Officers Forum meeting on April 4th, and I'll talk about the satisfaction survey that you'll get later on. So the rules of the game, everybody is very familiar with the Teams format. You'll see on the taskbar on the top, there's a chat, there's a question and answer, and there's a raise your hand. So we invite your questions and comments in real time throughout the broadcast. We want to make this conversational. And when you have a question or a comment, please feel free to interject. We'll find natural breakpoints in the conversation with our CRO panel to get your points across. Keep in mind the Competition Act is in full force throughout the broadcast. You are competitors, you remain competitors throughout the broadcast. So in terms of introducing our CRO panel, we have 3 CROs. Manuel Lewin is CRO with Zurich Canada. Amir Rahmani is CRO with Gore Insurance Company. And Eddie Tettevi is both CRO and Chief Compliance Officer with Sandbox Mutual. We have crafted a whole list of stock questions to guide discussion, and I'm going to throw those to the panelists. They're divided in 4 sections. We're going to talk about tools and risk identification sources. Number 1, we're going to look at processes, strategies, and approaches to managing risks. We're going to look at specific risks, and then we're going to close with some observations. So I will throw to one of our panelists to begin the discussion. It's going to be conversational. We're going to look to the other 2 panelists to join in if they have points they want to get across. We're going to throw it out to the audience there as well. If you have questions or comments, we certainly invite those. And in our preparation for this, I told our panel, they're not supposed to have all the answers to this. This is a window into their world, how their company deals with risk issues, how they go about identifying and assessing risks. Who's to know if that's correct? So this is a chance for you to say how you do it, but it's a chance to look over the fence, and they should know that everything, we're going to have a very attentive audience today. You're going to be listening very intently to our CROs, and tomorrow you're going to use everything you learned today to try to put them out of business. So it should be an interesting broadcast. So, okay, our panel questions. Thanks, Danica, for putting those up. Maybe let's go to the first. Okay, so just to when we talk about an emerging risk, we've done this for 8 years now. We've kind of it's kind of a committee decision. We've settled on an emerging risk is an accelerating risk where the outcome implications are not known or clearly assessed, and or where there's not appropriate ownership or classification of the risk. So that's kind of our working definition of an emerging risk. So let's go into our categories now. The very first category is tools and risk identification sources. Those are the other categories I talked about as well. So Danica, if you could proceed on. Okay, and our first question, I'm going to throw this to Amir. What risk identification tools do you use, and how and from whom do you get risk information in your organization? So Amir is going to begin the discussion, and then we'll throw it to the other 2 panelists. If you have points you want to get across as well, do join in, and then we'll just proceed through all of our questions. So Amir, over to you, please.
Thanks, Ian, and it's a pleasure to be talking to everyone. Though I'm surprised. I think we all know that everyone handles risk management the same way. There's a standardized formula, so we're just talking about that. And I'll apologize ahead of time. I'm still dealing with a bit of a head cold, so I will sound stuffy at times, and I beg everyone's forgiveness for that. But in terms of risk identification tools, I'm not going to talk about specific tools. What I'll talk about is more about approaches. and how I like to think about both our existing risk profile as well as our emerging risk profile. The first thing I like to think about as we're going through the process is recognizing that more and more of our risks are intersectional. And by that, I mean that they are best understood and assessed not as standalone risks, but in terms of how they interact and intersect with other risks within the organization, within the taxonomy. Um, and I felt that an early example of that was with climate. Climate in itself is a risk. We've talked about it as an existing risk. We talk about it as an emerging risk, given accelerating profiles. But I think the more valuable discussions within the organization is understanding where they intersect with other risks and where they drive impact, severity, frequency for anything on the taxonomy, including obviously insurance risk, but the organization's operational resilience, where it talks about intersecting with your operations, with your technology, with your third party and your supply chain risk. Third party is also kind of a compound risk in many ways. And I like to think of that also when I think of AI. AI as a risk is, there's an AI specific risk that talks to, competitive advantage and strategy and how you approach those. But I think it bears fruit to take the time and ask the question, how could AI impact other existing risks that we have? How does it impact cyber risk? How does it impact people risk? It's creating shifts in human behavior in that strategy. So that's the first kind of approach that I would suggest everyone focus on as they think through identification. And then the second is around concentrations and thinking, where do I have clusters of risks based on those intersections, but just based on my overall risk profile. And this is where we talk about, supply chain. Where do I have single points of failure that could intersect and create abnormally large impacts? Where do my controls have a concentration with the actual risk that they're trying to mitigate? And then the last approach I really like to take these days, and this is this started with technology and cyber risk, is that rather than starting with the traditional approach of you start with the goals, you talk about the risks that are associated with it, inherent risk and controls and residual risk. Because of the nature of some of these risks, where it's hard to understand and assess their impact to the organization, especially in terms of frequency, probability, there are really some cases where it makes sense to start with controls, with understanding that for any single process, for any single activity, there's an expected set of controls that you need to have. So cybersecurity is a good example because there are established frameworks that say, hey, if you want to be ranked at a NIST score of 3.8, you need to do these things. And approaching it that way and looking at the assessment more in terms of, do we have the expected controls that we want? Understanding that the risks are hard to assess and quantify allows us to kind of drive more value to the conversation, because ultimately it's asking the question, do we have a control gap? Are there things that we would expect in terms of best practices or industry standards that are missing, and how do we make up that gap? So those are kind of the three approaches that I would share with the audience today as to when you're identifying, when you're assessing these risks, be they the current risk profile emerging, some approaches you can take to try and organize those thoughts.
Eddie and Manuel?
I absolutely love that approach, Amir. Thank you for sharing that. Hey, everyone, it's really good to connect with you here. I'm also not feeling too well, so pardon me in case I have to drink some water as well. From our perspective, I really like the way Amir spoke to that intersectionality of risk. We think of that in a similar way. The way we approach it is to hone in on scenario planning. So we'll have some discussions around the table. This allows us to see the way risks from one department are interrelated to another department. We also, on certain risks, specific risks, not every risk, we'll do some stress testing and modeling. We don't do this on all our risks because we're small mutual. We have a standard risk register that we use. However, scenario planning has become our main approach, and I'll talk about that later in the conversation, especially around emergent risk, just because of how quickly it changes. So we've shifted towards an agile risk management approach where we're actually talking about risk on a weekly basis. And yes, I know that's a lot, but it's baked into a process that we already have within our organization. How do we receive risk information? We try to receive information from all data points. However, some of these data points are just weak signals. So there is some level of judgment that we apply to that process to figure out what is a concern, what we should be thinking about. But for the most part, we have discussions with the senior leadership team, and we do have some surveys that go around the organization that we partner with HR on to receive some signals from that angle as well.
Manuel, do you want to
Yeah,
chime
look,
in? Or?
well, first of all,
Yep.
can you hear me, guys?
Yes, yep.
Very good. Well, first of all, thanks Ian and PACICC for having me here. Great to see that that turnout, and happy to say that I'm in good health. So hopefully no no health related disruptions at my end. No, not much more to add on this question to my previous speaker. I think we use very similar means to identify risks, to think about scenarios. So yeah, nothing to add to this question, Ian.
Okay, Tanika, maybe we'll go on to the next question, number 2. Same category. What sources of information for scanning the horizon for future emerging risks do you use or recommend? So Manuel, I'm going to throw this to you. And benchmark studies, others, are there other sources? What sources of information are you using at Zurich?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, look, I think there is. I think there's quite a few good sources of information out there that we kind of turn our attention to do a bit of a completeness check or a sense check, or to just look for inspiration. And I'm happy to just kind of mention a few of these. It might be interesting for folks here on the call. There is a CRO forum, Emerging Risk Initiative. I'm not sure if people are familiar with kind of this side of the Atlantic. It's kind of more European focused in terms of memberships, but they have an emerging risk radar that they publish with some additional details that I usually find quite helpful. So we tend to look at that. We tend to look at the the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report, which has got some more long-term risk outlooks. Again, typically more of a sense check. There isn't usually anything on there that it's like, okay, I completely forgot about that. But I think it's a good sense check also just in terms of the priorities where things sit. PwC has their banana skins survey, which I think also kind of a good sense check. And then there's a bunch of kind of our competitors. Allianz has their risk barometer. So I think there's quite a bit of material out there that we use, but in the end, that's really to complement and sense check our own internal expert input, which I think that's the most important thing from my perspective. Is to take advantage of the subject matter expertise that resides within the organization, and what we're trying to do is definitely to make sure that we reach out to the folks and in claims, in legal, the technical underwriters, risk engineers, people with all kinds of backgrounds that are kind of plugged into their communities, and then just really try to tease out what's on the horizon at that more granular subject matter expert level, right? And that's typically also where then the fruitful discussions come out. And then of course we then get the input of a whole bunch of whether it's our executive committee or whether it's boards or risk and control committees, etc. Right? But again, these are then more sense checks, completeness checks. I think the valuable input really comes from the subject matter experts.
Okay, Amir and Eddie, do you want to add?
I'd say that I like the concept of kind of the sense check. I think of it as baselining or benchmarking against what I'm seeing in the industry. I'm relatively new to insurance. I've kind of grown up in other financial services. And I say that before I joined insurance, I could enjoy things. You could see snowfall and think, oh, it's snowing, rather than thinking, oh, frequency is going up because of, you could and I mean, that's kind of part of when we talk about emerging risk and insurance is, it's part of the great thing about working in this industry is that you touch everything, all aspects of, daily life, economy, but that's the downside is you touch every aspect of daily life, economy, technology. So it's one of those things of being inquisitive and being broad, and you never know what piece of information that's going to be coming in that you are going to be making a linkage. And I think that as a CRO, as a risk function, that's really where your value is you're supposed to live at the intersections. Like you're supposed to pull on a lot of different threads and think about, I read this thing here, I had this discussion over here, and I'm making a linkage between the two and bringing it up for discussion and making sure that the right voices are heard in the right places. And, Eddie talked about it, the weak signals, but it's kind of being in the middle of that web and making sure that you're aggregating those and identifying trends. So, and I really do think that's how we add value to the organization.
Great. Eddie, we're good. Do you want to add?
I couldn't say anything else. This was well covered. Thank you, guys.
Okay, so let's go to our next question, and I'm going to throw this into Eddie. Question number 3. Excuse me. In your organization, how does strategic planning and risk management work together on the identification of emerging risks, and how effectively are these functions collaborating to support strategic decisions? We'll begin with you, Eddie, and then we'll throw it to the panel.
Certainly. So our process is very unique. So all of you guys should take it as you want. So the way we tie these two together, I like to think of it like Hansel and Gretel. They work very hand in hand in the sense that we always start our strategic planning with a risk assessment. We're looking forward-looking at anything that we assume is going to come from the industry, from our province, where we are, and then the business plan, the strategic plan is designed to that risk. Following that, a business plan is created, and then we do a follow-up risk assessment. This is called the risk and resilience plan. This second plan is now looking at the business plan and the viability of that business plan for that year. So we start with risk, we end with risk, and we develop a business plan and develop a pseudo failover plan so that if something goes wrong with the business plan, we actually have a process that we go through. We're not trying to do things on the fly. And this brings a lot of confidence to the board. We started this process last year. We're going through it again because usually we do that second risk assessment in Q1. So we're going through it right now. And that's really how we approach it on our end. We've also tried to make sure we have cross membership in terms of our board. So we have certain expertise on different functions on the committee. This allows for continuity in terms of these discussions, because a lot of these discussions will happen at the compliance and risk committee, but we have people sitting on audit and finance who are there, and also people sitting on HR and governance just to facilitate that. The goal and what we've seen, how this has helped, is it's allowed us to be more resilient. It's not great because we do have some losses that we do not expect, but we are able to pivot with a planned approach because it's not too far off from what we projected will be a possible problem that will come up.
Okay, thank you, Eddie. Others on the panel?
Yeah, I mean, if I could add to that, I think is really, really, really important for the risk assessment process to be closely linked with the strategic and financial planning process. Now that said, like what we're doing is we separate between, I guess in our risk assessment between, what are more strategic risks, what are emerging risks, what are operational risks. And of course, not every emerging risk is strategic in nature, and not every strategic risk is emerging. But for that intersection where risks are truly, going to have an impact on the extent to which our companies can achieve their strategic objectives and goals and financial plans, etc. I think it's really important that the financial planning and strategy process on the one side and the risk assessment process on the other side are not like completely separate, and are viewed by people in the company as kind of going hand in hand, right? So I mean, for me personally, right, our head of strategy is someone that I try to keep very close, right? It's definitely a key stakeholder. And I think the more the risk can be presented in terms of strategic relevance, in terms of relevance for financial plans, etc., the more meaningful it becomes for, the full range of business stakeholders, right? And so being able to tie individual risks that are kind of sit on the radar back to a particular strategic objective or financial planning objective. Again, I think that makes it more tangible, more meaningful. It also ties the impact assessment more immediately to people's priorities. So I think it's super critical to have these processes close.
Amir, do you want to add to that?
No, I think that's great.
And I also throw it out to everybody else out there as we go through these questions. If you have points you want to make, you want to add to the discussion, please do so using the chat, the question and answer, or put your hand up. So Amir, I'm going to put you on deck for question number 4 here. Danik, if we could advance. There we are. Thank you. Do you see value in surveying internal employees and or external partners as part of your emerging risks identification process? Why or why not? And if yes, what tool do you use to conduct the survey? How frequently do you conduct this survey? Let's start with you.
Yeah, I know. I think that's a good question. I would say that probably for your current risk profile, most organizations already do this. But we call them, say, engagement surveys, or we call them net promoter scores, or we call them, whatever it is, where you are getting a sense and feedback from your key stakeholders as to how well you're achieving your goals and what are the the obstacles or the variability to achieving those goals. You're kind of already doing it. You have that understanding, and it's through a review of those results, the feedback that you're getting, that you can start to get a sense of what might be the currents, what could be the shoals that are coming up. So I think it's necessary to do it just to understand your risk profile, your current. I think it's beneficial to look ahead to understand how this could impact you. But I really do think that when you're thinking through that of your key stakeholders, not only understanding what's important to you, but what's important to them. Like, what are their emerging risks? What could impact their ability to navigate? Because there will be a knock-on effect. If we think about, the connected ecosystems that we're working on, if you don't understand the potential issues having to do with energy costs, with data centers, these may or may not impact you, and you have to go through that understanding of what is my situation, how do I line up against that. If I'm servicing construction companies and I'm worried about then cement costs, and again, this kind of goes back to before insurance, I could just enjoy things because everything wasn't connected. Everything wasn't didn't always come back to that thinking of what within this huge thriving ecosystem could go wrong at any time. So again, it's thinking through those scenarios. It's thinking of yourself at those intersections, and definitely looking at as many sense checks, touch points, baselines that you can to drive that understanding.
And Manuel and Eddie, do you want to add to that?
Look, I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword, right? We're using surveys locally here. I have used surveys extensively, like in a previous role when I was at the Zurich group level, right? And you have an organization that's like 50,000 plus people worldwide, right? And you obviously can't sit in a workshop with everyone, right? I think having a survey that's maybe a bit more broad than the number of people you can invite to a workshop can be helpful. I would say typically we would have gotten a handful, 2 or 3 nuggets where someone put something in a free text field that you're like, okay, that's an interesting perspective. I haven't thought of it that way. And so from that perspective, it was worth it. But I think you also then got to think, if you do that survey, people are going to expect, right, that you're going to do something with that information. And so you also got to be committed to analyzing it, which, to be honest, it was today's tool that's a bit easier than when I ran these things a couple of years back. But yeah, so look, I would say if you've got the capacity to do it, and it can be done very simple. We've just always done it through a office forms survey that works pretty well. I would definitely suggest don't go like 50 questions because as Amir mentioned there's already engagement surveys. There's a whole bunch of surveys. You don't want to bombard people with surveys, but the one thing I would say, and I think that's not specific to surveys, I think just to identification, particularly with emerging risk, right? You want to tap into that diversity of thought that you have within your organization, right? And you maybe, you want to make sure you don't talk to your usual suspects that you always talk to, and that you get people who might look at risk from a different lens and perspective to be able and feed their views and opinions into it. And for that, a survey can be really helpful, particularly if you're in a larger organization.
It's helpful to see the downside of that. Eddie, surveys, is that a popular thing for you, the consultation exercises in the Sandbox?
I do agree with what Manuel said. We are always conscious of survey fatigue, because everyone in our organization is trying to get these data points. So what I do now, I partner with a CX team. I actually had a meeting with them and I suggested, okay, so when surveys come, you guys take a look at the surveys and then you roll up the risk to us. So in that sense, you're taking advantage of the expertise on that team. So very similar to what Amir and Manuel has talked about. Don't try to take all those data points in. It's almost like the emperor with new clothes. You don't want to be listening to too many data points, else you cannot focus. At the same time, you don't want to be, what's that story? Chicken Little? Yeah, always crying wolf, or the sky was falling until when there was nothing happening. You want to be able to dig into the expertise on your team, have them interpret those data points at a higher level. That makes it a lot easier so you can focus on what matters. That's the addition. I'll have really great points that have been shared.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll turn to question number 5. And I see in the Q&A, let's just jump to that for a second here. What kind of things do you ask in the surveys? That came from Steve Lukix out there. I'll throw it to the panel. That's in the question and answer. What sorts of things are you surveying when you do survey outside parties?
I can take that. Just with my conversation last week, I did ask the CS team to ask this question: what keeps you up at night? So something that simple.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I would say is, I would say leverage what's existing. I don't know if I would ever specifically ask kind of a risk-related input through surveys. I'm a big fan of kind of boots on the ground and making sure that you have face time. I'm a huge proponent of establishing a risk champion network within the organization, and as much as possible, kind of having discussions through that. But I think we go, like, there's so many data points in terms of survey responders that it's like the adage that someone's KPI is another person's KRI. There's so many interconnected points to this that with what's existing out there, you should be able to get some good intelligence.
Okay, fair point. So Manuel, I'm going to put you on deck for this question number 5, and that's going to complete this category. Do you have any tips for implementing an emerging risk identification process? And then we'll go across the panel, maybe to Amir after this, if you have.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, for me, I have, we kind of run this as a 2-stage process almost, right? And I would say there is a more focused part to the process that's really focused on kind of that, the emerging and the weak signal part, right? And then there's probably the more, current risk profile element to it, right? One thing that I would definitely say, right, is that sometimes, that differentiation between, well, what's a strategic risk or a top risk or an emerging risk or an operational risk, right, that we like to debate so that we can map things in our taxonomies and stuff like that, it's sometimes lost to our counterparts in the business and the first lines. So one thing that I definitely like doing is to just keep things open, right? And as we do risk identification sessions, to just say, well, look, whatever's on your mind, like don't worry about what we're going to call this, right? Just tell me what's on your mind, right? So I think that's one thing, right? Sometimes emerging risk definitions can get very conceptual, and you can spend a lot of time trying to figure out in which bucket something falls. So don't let that be the problem of the people you rely on for identifying the risk, right? Let them just bubble up whatever it is, and you map it in the background however you want. That's number one. Number two, right, to the point I made earlier in this call, I think I found particularly kind of the emerging nature of the risk a good way to engage certain expert communities within our enterprise, right? I think particularly within for the underwriting community, the legal community, claims community, right? To kind of think, emerging risks that are related to underwriting, right? What's the next PFAS, right? Or what is what are we concerned about, social inflation or nuclear verdicts, that kind of stuff, where they're going to be more focused perspectives, but that's the kind of stuff that our experts and our companies kind of love thinking about, right? Where again, if you'd ask for an emerging risk, it might not necessarily bubble up. So engaging those expert communities kind of in a more targeted fashion, and have either workshops with them or sit together individually one-on-one and kind of tease it out of your experts. But just leveraging that wealth of SME expertise within the organization. So these are the two things I'd say.
Thank you, Manuel. And Amir, do you have tips you want to add?
I think that was a great response. I think you have to balance between, owning the framework and driving those discussions, but you can't get into the realm of dogma. It has to be about something. It has to be useful to the business, and that balancing act of if you're too worried about definitions, if you're kind of, well, actually, you're going to lose your audience. So finding that balance is really important. My suggestion is start and be iterative, and be ready to work with the business to find something that works for you.
Okay, super. Thank you. And we're going to move to our next category, which is processes, strategies, and approaches to risk identification, identification and assessment. So I'm going to throw this one to Amir to begin with. How do you collect feedback from your board of directors?
So you talk to them is the simplest answer I have. This question, I'm assuming, has to do with kind of the spectrum of risk, not only emerging, but the risk profile. There is a natural flow of information from kind of bottom up, where you're collecting information and you're feeding it up all the way to the board, and giving them a sense of the risk profile of the organization and things that are shifting and areas of concern. This is you communicating to the board, and there's a top-down view of what are the expected behaviors, what are the expected outcomes, and we think of that from a risk appetite perspective. And you're facilitating that bottom-up, top-down conversation, and you're part of making sure that feedback is getting to all aspects of the organization in terms of what's expected from a risk perspective. I think, talking to them, it sounds kind of flippant, but you kind of have to see what are the questions that they're asking, like what are the things that they're focused on. Where are they challenging either your assessment, the organization's assessment of a certain risk profile? Where are they looking to get more assurance? Where are they asking for greater testing, greater reporting? Boards, independent boards, that they're coming at this with a unique skill set. They're going to have expertises, and that's going to influence the kind of questions they ask and the things they're going to want you to ask about and answer about. So that's really the approach, is that kind of ongoing formal communication. I meet with, obviously, the board as a whole, but I meet with individual board members on an ongoing, regular kind of perspective to see what's top of mind for them. What are they concerned about? What are they hearing? And again, my job is to sit at that intersection and get all those signals and construct a narrative from it.
And I think, excuse me, Amir, I think that's kind of the hidden question here, is that your points of contact as a CRO with the board, how structural is that? Do you have regular interaction? Is it only scheduled dates informally as a group? And so you've touched on some of that. And I guess all different company sizes are represented on this call. Some are in touch with their board all the time. Some are so large, the organization, the interaction is not that often. So I think they're kind of gauging.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have different boards.
your
You're going to have
organization
different
check in
board compositions. You're going to have different board capabilities. Yeah, I say that I'm very lucky that I have an engaged, informed board that participates, that is wants input, wants to be kept up to date, and you know, I've been very lucky in that respect.
So Eddie, you're a smaller organization, and Manuel, you're a much larger organization. How do you answer a question like that? Let's go to Eddie first, and then Manuel.
Certainly. So from my perspective, we try to make sure we always have a discussion at the board table. So again, when the signals come, I create a risk report, I present quarterly. I don't actually do a lot of speaking in the boardroom. I pretty much will say something along the lines of, I assume you've read the risk report. These are the things I'm thinking. Let's have a conversation. And then we have this conversation in the presence of management, just because in case the board wants to ask certain specific questions, they actually speak directly to management. After that, I have an in-camera session with the board. So this is quarterly. I do meet with the board in camera, but also I do have a one-on-one meeting with the chair of the Compliance and Risk Committee. It's pretty much very informal. We have a scheduled time, but I reach out to her at any point in time just to figure out what she is thinking about, what other people on the board are thinking about. We try to make this an interactive dialogue because risk changes all the time. And the board has a different perspective from us that are in the organization. So it's always really great to get their perspective. So we have these informal touch points, but I also have these quarterly structured meetings where I consistently meet with the board and also meet with the Compliance and Risk Chair.
Manuel, how does that jive with your organization? How does that compare?
Yeah, look, and we're operating as a branch here in Canada, so we don't actually have a local board here in Canada. But I can certainly speak from prior experiences where, you know, I think, again, you know, risks that are strategic in nature and that intersection with the strategy process, absolutely right. When the strategy goes to board, the strategic risks go to the board, and there needs to be an active conversation with the board about what those, you know, call them strategic, call them top risk, but, you know, whatever those heavy hitting risks to the organization are. When it comes to the more out there, maybe slightly longer term, you know, weak signal risk, where it's also hard to say are they really material, are they not material? I think it's just important to demonstrate to the board that that is something that you know, you think about, they have under control, right? And it's for us, right, that radar, it would, you know, it would sit in a appendix of a risk report or in a section of a risk report. We wouldn't actively discuss it with the board members, but that's where you know, the survey comes back in. That is definitely something that I've done when I was, you know, at Zurich Group, and we would have sent a survey to the board where, you know, you're not going to get a Zurich Group board member necessarily to talk for 2 hours leisurely about, you know, kind of out there type of risks, but you may be able to get some input another way, right? So but yeah, I think for your board members, the focus got to be on those risks that are really of a strategic relevance, right, and that reflect the strategic nature of the board.
Okay, fair game. Danica, let's move on to the next question, and I'm going to put Eddie in the crosshairs for this one. Question number 2, how does responsibility for identification of emerging risks get split out between the business, the first line, and risk management, the second line? Start with you on this one.
That's a great question. So for us, we have this training that we give to the front line of the first line of business, getting them to understand that they always own the risk. So anyone who takes a role in the first line of business has a risk training. They have this understanding that they are responsible for initially spotting risk. They have the eyes on the ground. They have the expertise that we might not have, let's say in underwriting or in claims management, something very specific that they would see. They are the ones that go out into the industry for their conferences. So they might hear things that are emerging that we might not even know about. So we do train them, and they are empowered to understand that they can report that up to us. Our responsibility in the second line function is to ensure that we are challenging what they are bringing. We do try to ask some very targeted questions that stimulates thought, because our goal is not to influence where the risk owner is going, but we're trying to allow them to really think through the risk, to understand if this is really viable, if this really applies to Sandbox. We're very hands-off from that process. However, as coaches and guides, we support them. So we design the framework, we design the way it'll flow, how information flows, but we empower the first line of business to actually operationalize that, and we train consistently all throughout the year. We have training sessions over and over again. Every single year they go through a training session just to remind them, and sometimes we take it to the next level. We make it a little bit interesting and throw something very surprising at them just to see how they will respond. But we try to do this to ensure that we can avoid gaps, because what we also look at is that interconnectedness or the interrelation between risks. We train them to see it, but sometimes we have a more enterprise view compared to someone who is very focused on something in the actual world or in the underwriting world. So that's how we separate it at Sandbox.
Super. So Amir and Manuel, in that order, let's throw it to you. Splitting the responsibility for emerging risk identification, lines 1 and 2.
Yeah, I would say that it's much the same as kind of known risk or current risk identification. The first line owns the risk. We all know that. But the second line, ERM's kind of value is that we provide the frameworks by which that identification, that assessment takes place. So, you know, you're providing the language that enables those communication. You're kind of helping to flesh out concepts as to what does emerging risk mean? You know, how within this organization, how do we think about emerging risk? And you're making sure that it's kept top of mind, that, you know, you're promoting that activity, you're doing your job to promote risk awareness. So I would say that's kind of the mix. This question makes me think of a quote I once heard that has kind of differing you know, some people like it, some people don't like it, but I've once read a CRO say that, you know, they thought the ERM's function job as saying that if something happens and you didn't tell us about it, you know, if there's something that you're concerned about and something happens, then that's really on you. If there's something that you're concerned about and you told us about it and something happens, then that's on us. And, you know, I kind of, that resonates with me somewhat, is that ERM's role is to make sure that the business feels comfortable speaking up. And then once they've spoken up, they have to feel like they're supported to resolution, that they're not, they're not just dumping the risk over, but that they feel supported, that something is going to happen, that a decision is going to be made, and that they're not kind of all alone. But if there's a responsibility that if you kind of want to approach it all alone, then you're going to be all alone. So again, the quote raises different kind of reactions, but there are parts of it that really resonate with me.
Okay, fair game. Emmanuel?
Yeah, look, fairly similar. I mean, we kind of, it's the run-of-the-mill 3 lines of defense model here that we apply. I mean, for emerging risk, typically a second line will, we own the framework, and we will initiate the process. We'll run the workshops, et cetera. But the input comes from the first line, the output goes to the first line, the action's owned by the first line. I think a pretty standard approach.
Okay, great. So let's move on to question number 3, and I'm going to put Amir on deck for this one first. Can you provide examples of top-down and bottom-up approaches that you currently use to identify emerging risks? And we'll go across the panel.
Yeah, in thinking about this, I don't think that there are kind of any specific approaches that would differ from emerging risk to kind of an understanding of the risk profile of the organization. And so that, that bottom-up approach, I'll lean back to the risk champion framework that we have in terms of your job is to try to get as many points of contacts throughout the organization, as broad as you can and as deep as you can. So if you can get with the front line, you should. If you can get inputs from all levels of the organization, if you're able to look at independent data sources, you should. I like to use the term of ERM's role within the organization as being a part, but a part. You have to be a part of the organization. You have to tie in, but you have to understand that you are still there to own that framework, to challenge where necessary, to draw sources, to look at the horizon. So, the example I would give for a bottom up is definitely in terms of those discussions that we have emerging from the organization's risk champion network. And bottom down, or top down, it's really through the discussions that we have, through the questions that are being asked, through what the board is focusing on, that allows us to include that perspective when we're asking different questions throughout the organizations, when we're looking at the effectiveness of certain controls, when we're helping to risk weight approaches from an assurance perspective and coordinating with the other lines of defense.
Okay, Manuel, do you want to add to that?
I think we've covered. I think we've covered most of them, right? Whether it's risk identification workshops, subject matter expert interviews, surveys. I think we've covered all that I can think of.
No problem. So we'll put you on deck for question number 4. Let's, Danica, if we could move on to, there we are. Thank you. So how can companies quantify impacts of emerging risks such as cyber, pandemic, terrorism, etc., given the escalating rate of change in cyber exposure, both risks and required or expected responses? What are the panel's thoughts about how to quantify those exposures? So begin with Manuel on this one, please.
It's a lot of work and effort. I mean, these are a lot of emerging risk topics, right, are really complex, right? And so truly quantifying them, you gotta run scenario analysis, right? I think that's the only way, right? I would say what we do. I mean, either we run scenario analysis, and we do this in a few areas. Sometimes, it's just a back of the envelope assumption, quick and dirty to see, where on a heat map or a radar, kind of in which bucket does it fall. And sometimes, quite frankly, it's just a gut feel of where it comes to sit. And I think it's a mix of how actively concerned we are about the risk and whether or not we have the capability and expertise to actually do the scenario analysis, right? So again, I'm certainly lucky in a large organization to be able and lever a lot of expertise and tools that are available throughout the company. So when it comes to things like, climate change or severe weather events, stuff like that, that features quite prominently on our, emerging risk list, right? We do have the capability to actually scenario run, right, and to quantify, other areas. You mentioned cyber, right? This is something We do for accumulation risk management purposes. We run cyber scenarios, right? So it's a matter then also of kind of levering what's already around our underwriting function has the capability, to run a whole range of scenarios, right, around, around the liability space, right, where we can see, well, let's model out what the next PFAS would look like, and so we have the capability to do that, but it's a lot of effort. Sometimes, but to be honest, sometimes just a bit of a back of the envelope. Some assumptions that you can validate with a few experts should get you in the right range too, right? So it's not, if that's a capability the organization doesn't have, just building it for the purpose of an emerging risk process, it's probably not going to pay for itself.
I invite the other panelists do you have points you want to make here as well?
No, I thought that was well, I mean, to a certain extent, this is kind of a trick question, because if you could, assess the impact of a risk, then it wouldn't really be emerging. It's a known risk. You can quantify it. You can kind of put some controls against it. But even cyber as a known kind of quote known risk, it's one of those that no one is ever comfortable taking off of yellow. No one's going to go, oh, we're green cyber-wise, because the unknown unknowns are so great that going at it from a traditional kind of risk, inherent risk, control, residual risk is really, really hard. And this is where kind of a focus, not so much on the risk, but on saying within cyber, what are the controls that I need to have to deal with the current and the emerging trends that I'm seeing. So if I am really good with my firewalls, my kind of the technical stuff, but I'm seeing that there's more of social engineering, do I have the appropriate controls to make sure that I'm covered to that type of a vector? That I think helps us to get to a so what of, as we work through the scenarios that Manuel talked about, so what? Like, what is the control? What is the mitigation that could be possible, and how do we approach that?
Hey, Danica, we're going to put Eddie in the crosshairs for question number 5 to begin, and then we'll throw it to the rest of the panel. Despite having guidance in place to help assess and quantify risk impact and likelihood, significant judgment is often still required. What advice or changes in process would you recommend to help make this easier for stakeholders, risk owners? Separately, what advice would you give to risk teams as they challenge such assessments as they're made? Eddie, we'll begin with you, and then we'll throw it to the rest of the panel. Thanks.
This is a good question. At Sandbox, one thing we always try to do is to simplify things. It's part of why we exist, to simplify insurance. So the advice I'll probably share is to try, simplify, and standardize things. We are experts in the field. We deal with risk. We know the jargon, the lingo, but not everyone really operates that way. So having this simple criteria that they can follow. So from our risk appetite, from our complex work we do, we build this very simple risk map that we put out there for the organization, and people can just use that to understand if something is really bad or hits a certain threshold that they need to let someone know about. So making things simple is a good approach to this, just so people are not guessing. You want to give them a treasure map so that they can follow and be able to use the same common language. So something that's simple for everyone to use, not necessarily at your level. The other thing we do is we do some calibration. I'm yet to do it this year, but what I mean by calibration is I do have a town hall where we do a quick risk scoring. This is across the organization. Everyone scans a QR code and they're answering questions, and everyone can see it on the screen, and you get to see how multiple people score risk. And the range is just wide. We use this as an educational tool. It also gives us feedback on how a training is going, because the goal is to get everyone to be speaking the same language and aligning on the way risks are scored within your organization, so that if team A says this is high risk, team B understands what high risk means. Else the challenge is everyone's high is completely different and you would not have this same conversation. So we do some calibration. It's not anything in depth, but it's just a data point as well for us to create this risk intuition across the organization. And then we also make sure our approach, the risk team, is very collaborative. We want to ensure that we are encouraging people, we are guiding them as to how to get it done. It's almost like teaching a baby to do something. And I have a little one, so this is very practical for me, because you want them to be able to do it long term rather than doing it for them. Sometimes it's easy to just do it and let it go, but supporting them, guiding them, and allowing them to learn, that is a really great step. So that's the advice I would pass on.
Your colleagues on the panel, do you have, and then I had a question come in on the further classification on this one question, but we'll come to that in a sec. But let's go to the other panelists. Do you want to add to question number 5?
Well, no, I think Amir said before, right? Almost by definition, we're saying emerging risks are hard to quantify, right? So I think for emerging risks in particular, you know, it's really more about the journey than the destination. I don't think we should work on the assumption that we can get likelihood and impact completely, right? Even if you scenario model, right, there's going to be a wide range of uncertainty for these kind of scenarios. So to me, it's more about having the awareness with the right set of people, so that, you know, if down the line someone goes off and develops a new product or whatever, you can like connect the dots and be like, oh, isn't there, there was something kind of in an emerging risk discussion, so I should probably be thinking about this particular aspect and take a step back, right? So I don't think it's all that important to get that, you know, the assessment exactly right, more so than having the awareness for people to say, hey, look, there is something around this area that leads me to be, you know, to be cautious and think carefully, you know, and connect those dots. That's what I'd say.
Amir's good with that. Okay, so now one of our viewers out there has asked just a little more pointed. We focus on material risks and proportionality. Don't have a lot of resources. How do we focus in on material risks? Is it quantification of loss from a financial perspective? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, yes, but, and, you know, I think financial loss is an important aspect. And ultimately, it all goes down, like it all boils down to a financial loss of some sort. So if you think of any impact that has to do with public perception, or, you know, the downstream impact is concerns about lost revenue or regulatory fines or whatever, like there's a financial impact to it. But understanding that it's not easy to create those linkages at the different levels within the organization. Like if you're talking to you know, someone in the claims group and trying to get information or additional insight around an operational risk, it's hard for you to kind of say, okay, well, like, what's the impact of the financial statements? Like they're just, you have to put it in look at risk impacts differently, and understanding that there's different facets that you have to incorporate. The challenge, though, is for you, as you're putting together that matrix, to create consistency and comparability between the different types of impacts that you could expect, so that when someone says, yeah, it's a heavy financial impact, it's the same. It's within kind of that same category of a high regulatory or reputational or operational impact.
I really like that notion of a strategic risk, right? Where the exam question to the organization, right? Every organization has a strategy and a financial plan, right? And the exam question for a strategic risk is take your strategic objectives, take your 3-year or 5-year financial plan or whatever it is. Think about the assumptions that you're making that will get you there. Think about everything that has to go right for you to get there. And now think about the risks that could lead you to not achieve those targets, right? I think then you kind of get to those risks that really matter to the organization as a whole, right? Whether that impact then is financial or reputational or operational in terms of execution, right? And when we go through that process, right? Yeah, there's typically 1 or 2 or 3 emerging risks that come out of that, and that will then sit on our kind of top risk or strategic risk a heat map or radar. And yes, then we kind of run a separate emerging risk process that, you know, where I agree was it, you know, the person who asked that question, you can sink endless amounts of time to kind of think about all the esoteric risks that are out there, and that you can then calibrate to the resources that you have, right? But starting with that strategic angle and thinking about the business strategy and the financial plan, which really sits at the center of every organization, I think that immediately focuses the mind, and that should give everyone a good impression as to where to focus the effort in terms of risk mitigation.
Sorry. Another question has come in just again, trading on this point regarding risk assessment, and this is Kenwell Gold. Thank you for the question. Regarding risk assessment, wondering to get some insights on your approach. Do you utilize a single enterprise risk assessment scale, i.e. likelihood and impact for all risks, including operational risks, or do you employ separate scales for enterprise risks such as insurance, financial, reputational risks, and operational risks? Throw that to the panel.
Well, so yes, I mean, in terms of this discussion, if you think about emerging risk as an example, you're going to have to assess them, even though you can't really get a great sense of the impact. You're going to have to rank them in some way. So between, call it our current risk profile and our emerging risk profile, there are differences, and then there are going to be differences based on the level of complexity you have and the capability you have within an organization. You know, I've talked about a simplified approach around cyber risks, but if you want to invest in it, there are frameworks like the FAIR framework that allows you to kind of more numerically or quantify risks that have to do with operational cyber risks. There's scenario, like when we talk about scenario analysis, you can have a high level scenario analysis, or you can go to the models stage. So I think, you know, my suggestion, and this is especially true for small and medium-sized organizations, is that as much as you can drive like a standard process, do so, because it's more about understanding what the top risk is, and ranking and understanding your risk hierarchy versus, you know, until you get to a certain point, understanding specifically, well, this is, you know, 0.3% higher than this risk, or like it's really about just understanding the profile and where you need to, if you need to expand your limited resources to close some control gaps.
Okay. Eddie, Manuel, do you want to add, or do you want to move on?
I just want to echo what Amir has said. Regardless of the tools or the techniques you use, if you find yourself in a small organization, you want to map that to a standardized process. Simplicity is the best approach to this because, again, just to echo what Amir said, the goal is for you to see your profile because you cannot do everything. You need to invest your time and your resources into the most significant risks that you are concerned about, your board is concerned about. In order to do that, there has to be some level of standardization, regardless of the framework you use. You still try to map it to one standardized process or assessment so that you can make decisions based on that final assessment.
Yeah, so for our like strategic risks, operational risk, we rank on one scale, same impact criteria. For emerging risks, we treat them slightly differently. We bucket them by time horizon, right? So this is going to be relevant now in the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, right? So just to give a bit of a sense of time. And then just a very simple kind of in terms of the impact, kind of a low, medium, high in terms of, if this risk materializes with this impact kind of whole of organization, would it impact one particular part of the organization, but it's very high level for emerging risk.
We have 18 minutes left on the broadcast. We had a lengthy list of questions. I'm going to give out our panelists' contact information in the follow-up note to members out there with the questions that we had for today. So if there's a question that we didn't get to that you have, you want to take up with one of the panelists or all of the panelists to get their thoughts, you're certainly invited to do that later on. Just wanted to get that across to everybody out there. So let's go to question number 6, and I've got Amir on deck for this one. And this closes out this category. What advice would you give to risk managers in identifying the root causes of a risk rather than confusing them with the symptoms of the risk? Are there questions one can ask when faced with this conundrum? Begin with you, Amir.
Yeah, so to keep this simple, keep your framework simple in terms of, how you've defined your taxonomy and your impact. They should be different things. You should have those defined. In terms of the approach, the tool that I like to use, and there are many tools out there, but kind of just a simple 5 why process of trying to get down. And then lastly, the micro classification is less important than you getting to the sense that you understand what the control gap was or is, and that you can either address it, live with it, whatever it is. So, definition is part of what you're there to do. That guidance is what you're there to do, but be effective. This is where we have to straddle framework and dogma. Just get to the right answer and go from there.
One thing that has been effective for us, we also use the 5 why, but we also use the bow tie risk assessment. It seems to be a workflow that gets people thinking about the root cause of a problem a lot easier when we present it that way. So find a framework that works for your organization, because every organization is different. You want to figure out what works, try a few things, sample test it, and if it's working, expose it to the broader organization, and again, it will produce the results you're looking for.
And Yoel, do you want to add to that, or we'll move on?
The 5 whys, super simple and usually gets you there. You just have to discipline to not stop after 3 and go to the 4th and the 5th.
Okay, fair game. So we're going to move on to our next category, which is specific risks. And I'm going to approach Manuel on this one first. So wildfire, cyber, and regulation are significant risks already facing the industry. Although they're present and currently being dealt with, the quick evolving pace in each of these areas may qualify them as emerging. Do you share this perspective, and how are you addressing the uncertainty within each of these risks?
Yeah, look, so definitely. And there's a lot of risks out there that have a current component and an emerging component, right, where part of the risk is very much relevant today, and another part of the risk is, more in the realm of, weak signal emerging maybe later on, right? I mean, Look, again, as a large organization, we do have the advantage of resources for things like wildfire, right? We have current wildfire models, but we also have the capability to stress test those models and to look what would our portfolio exposure look like under any particular set of climate change scenarios and be able to look at our portfolios that way, right? Yeah, with cyber, similarly, we do have some modeling capabilities in that space, right? So we can get a bit of a sense of the not just the current, but the emerging nature. So yes, agree. There's often two aspects, an emerging and a current, to many of the risks, and to the extent that there are the resources to model these out, that's obviously great. And if not, right, I think we've discussed a number of techniques, earlier on where the process still provides value.
And Amir, do you want to take a stab? Want to add to that?
I think that was kind of well thought out and covered most of everything. I mean, I don't want to be too facetious about this, but I would say that at this point, I see regulatory as less of a risk, as just more of a cost. Like this is a known thing. Like yes, there is the variability of things happening, but you just have to treat it as a cost at this point and understand that there will be increases and just build that in.
Okay, so let's move on to question number 2. How would you assess the current state of cyber risks to clients and insurers? Are the risks well understood? Are insurers responding to provide the right solutions? So I'll throw that open to the panel. Does anybody want to jump in on this one?
I mean, I don't think that anyone's going to argue too hard if I say that the temperature is high, that there's always going to be risks within the industry. I think we've seen examples where the industry specifically has been targeted, thankfully more in the US, but it's something that we always keep our eye on. We've seen kind of a shift between sophisticated as well as brute attacks that are technical in nature, and now going towards more kind of social engineering attacks, and something that we worry about. We always work because of the ecosystem that you're in. You have to worry about third parties a lot more than you did, and it's harder because the controls aren't yours. My suggestion, and this is from my experience, is get to know either your underwriters who underwrite insurance, this type of insurance, or the insurance company, the markets that you go to, because they more than anyone understand what the right controls are that to have in place to reduce losses. And looking at things like NIST, those frameworks is very important, but go to the underwriters who underwrite this and learn from those examples yourself and apply those to your organization. You want to be the organization that is easy to underwrite for and considered low risk.
Okay, we'll move on to question number 3, Danica, if you could. Thank you, Amir. And this one, I'm going to look to Eddie first. I'm going to throw it to Eddie first, and then we'll go to across the panel. As an industry, what role do you think we play in ESG issues, environmental, social, and governmental? Your thoughts on this?
From an environmental perspective, I think that we are the resilience builders. We help communities bounce back when something has happened. We also help with this transition towards a greener economy, depending on what you choose to underwrite or what you choose to invest in. But ultimately, it's almost the insurance industry stores resources with knowledge that something bad is going to happen, and then we provide that solution to them. From the social aspect of things, I think that we promote this financial equity if we decide to participate in programs like flood insurance that will be available to people who may not afford it. So if you participate in any of those affiliate programs, that's something that we do. We support diversity and inclusion, sometimes internally within the organization, but just in participating in community awareness, we are getting everyone involved. From a loss control perspective, just educating your policyholders, that is an aspect of inclusion as well. And then on the governance side, I think we do have the opportunity to lead this industry or this concept with high ethics and strong accountability as we file our due diligence. All of these different things that we do, we set this example across the industry, and other industries can look at us and even learn from it. So I think we enforce this aspect of fair play also from a governance perspective. So from my perspective, I think that we are positioned to lead in all of these three different areas, especially Sandbox being a mutual. This is a big deal for us. So we do our best to speak to the community in which we do business.
Great, good points. Amir, Manuel, do you want to add to that?
I think Eddie laid this out very, very well. I think from a emerging risk perspective, I would say, I mean, there's obviously a lot of potentially emerging risks that come out of the environmental and increasingly also the social aspects. So one of the things that we've done, we used to kind of run a separate, sustainability risk type of process, and we've brought the emerging and the sustainability lenses together because there is a big overlap.
Okay, great. Let's move on to question number 4 in specific risks, and I'm going to look to Manuel to lead on this one, and then invite the panel to join in. Are you concerned about judicial social expansion of insurance contract wording covering risks such as cyber, pandemic, ransomware payments, etc.? That's something that worries you?
That's a meaty one. Yes is the short answer. I mean, it depends a bit on the jurisdiction, right? I mean, certainly for all our US exposure, we are, social inflation is a big topic for sure. I think in Canada, we've got the benefit of having some of the, the caps. And so I think the environment here in Canada is never going to be as bad as in the US, on the liability side of things. And there's definitely some social inflation here as well, but it's not as concerning. Europe is one for those who kind of have cross-border exposure, Europe is definitely an area to keep an eye on. There is the a combination of things that are happening there. There is the Representative Actions Directive that's probably going to lead to more collective action in Europe, and then there is a Product Liability Directive that is creating new obligations on the liability side. Put the two together, there's definitely some potential to get more social expansion and that kind of judicial expansion in Europe. So yes, definitely a concern, but I think in Canada we're in a relatively good spot, certainly compared to the US. But yeah, I mean, you definitely for your liability book, you want to have a very good handle of where your cross-border exposures are in which jurisdictions, and kind of understand for each jurisdictions what those risks are.
And our other panelists, do you have points you want to add here?
The only thing I would add is get in step with your reinsurer. Make sure that you understand, when you talk about wording, the worst thing that could happen is if you're not aligned. So make sure you're aligned.
Okay, fair game. Question number 5, and Amir, I'm going to put you on deck for this one. What risks do you foresee in continuing down the path of the current auto insurance product reform in Canada?
So, I mean, in terms of the product itself, this is one of those things where I think it'd be easier to say where there aren't risks with the auto product in Canada. Again, just because it intersects with everything. We are seeing a case of, auto is the everyone has to buy it. You're going to see continued commoditization of it. There's modeling risk involved with it. We've seen regulatory pressures against it because it's something everyone has to buy, and affordability is something that's top of mind for everyone. We've talked about social inflation. It's in the middle of any tariff discussion that you're going to have. It's going to be in the middle of any world conflict and supply chain issue. When you talk about kind of the rare earth dependency, it's going to be in the middle of theft discussions and the economy. And it's going to be in the middle of any discussions having to do with technology. So, and international trade. So we know that we are looking to open up additional capacity for Chinese EVs that could be on Canadian roads sooner rather than later, but we don't necessarily have the information to underwrite those currently. But that's true of any kind of change in technology. It's not inconceivable that at some point we have to worry about cyber risk in terms of automobiles. And one of the things that we look at from an emerging risk perspective is impacts due to autonomous driving and what that will mean for us. And we're already seeing that. We're already seeing differential products in the US having to do with autonomous driving. And so, yeah, if you are in this area, this is where you have to be inquisitive, you have to be broad, and you have to be ready to run through a lot of these scenarios to see how does it intersect with whatever strategy you might have.
And Eddie, Manuel, do you want to add to that?
I can add something. The one thing I think about along these lines is also the change in climate of the way consumers use auto. So as people move towards autonomous vehicles and even ride sharing, usage-based insurance, these are all things that we should be thinking about on the emergent side, and just making sure that we're keeping track of some mitigations around telematics and evolving our underwriting and our loss control processes to align with all of these changing consumer use cases.
Okay, that's probably a pretty good point to end discussion for today, because I want to respect people's times. It's 2:28. We just want to wrap up a couple of points before we close down the broadcast. I want to thank our CRO panel of experts: Manuel Lewin from Zurich Canada, Amir Rahmani from Gore Insurance Company, and Eddie Tettevi from Sandbox Mutual. In our organization meetings heading into today's webinar, I was struck by your enthusiasm for the issues. You really come across as guys that really enjoy what they do for a living, and it's a real joy to see. So I appreciate your time today. And they were on this panel today simply because they put their hand up and said they want to share their experience. So next year, we'll be looking for more of the same, and throughout the year on if you want to get more involved and be a panelist in one of our discussions, use the follow-up survey to let me know that you want to get more involved. I certainly appreciate that. So thank you, panelists. And we'll now look ahead with Danika's help to the next event is going to be on, it's a Tuesday. It's not typically our Thursday. We had to kind of work around the availability of speakers. So Tuesday, April 14th, you're going to get a notice on this shortly. Our keynote speaker is Patrick Derry from AMF. He's going to be the new head of CCIR again. It's going to be talking about issues and priorities for the organization, the Canadian Council of Insurance Regulators. There'll be big interest in that. Discussion number one, we're going to look at TRIA, the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act, with experts from the states, Josh Andrews from Fager Drinker, Tom Glassick from the DC Insurance Federation, and Blair Wiebel from Congressional Research Service. And for the first time, we're going to look in discussion number two about auto insurance reform. We haven't ever in all of our webinars ever looked at auto insurance. So we're going to delve into that. We're building out the panel. We had two other people join us today. It's going to be folks from IBC, and it's going to be anchored by Trevor Foster. We're working with the other two panelists. That will be confirmed. You'll see that in a note to everybody shortly. Tomorrow, there is going to be a notice. We want your feedback on today's discussion and thoughts on panelists and topics for future. So we certainly appreciate you. Most people stayed on the line today. It's great. Greatly appreciate that. Look forward to seeing you at the next event, and appreciate you being online with us today. So have a great day, and we'll be in touch soon. Take care.